There comes a moment in every girl's life when she sits alone, maybe late at night, maybe after a heartbreak, maybe after another disappointment, and she whispers, "God, what do you actually want me to look for in a man? What am I supposed to wait for?" And the silence that follows can feel confusing, because the world gives one answer, social media gives another answer. But deep down, your heart knows you were made for something more, something sacred, something intentional, something aligned with heaven. And today I want to remind you of what God wants you to look for in a man. The things most girls overlook, and the things most men never discover within themselves. When God wants to bless a girl, he doesn't send a perfect man. He sends a growing man, a man who may not know everything, but is willing to learn, a man who may not have all the answers, but has the humility to seek them, a man who isn't afraid to look in the mirror and say, "God, make me better." So the first thing God wants you to look for is a man who is teachable, not a man who pretends to know everything, not a man who carries a loud ego, not a man too proud to be corrected, but a man who allows God to shape him, break him, rebuild him, and lead him. Because a man who refuses to grow will eventually make you shrink. The second thing God wants you to look for is a man who chooses peace over pride, a man who can apologize without you begging, a man who understands that arguments do not have to turn into battles, a man who listens to understand, not to attack. A man whose presence calms your spirit rather than disturbs your soul. You see, God knows your heart. He knows how sensitive you are, how deeply you feel, how much you love. And he doesn't want you with someone who treats your emotions like a burden. God wants you with someone who sees your vulnerability as a gift and protects it with gentleness and care. The third thing God wants you to look for is a man whose love is consistent, not loud one day and silent the next, not available today but absent tomorrow, not hot in the beginning and cold when things get real. God wants you to be with a man who shows up not just in the romance of the early days, but in the challenges, the storms, the insecurities, the waiting, and the growing. A man who doesn't make you guess his intentions. A man who makes effort a habit, not a temporary performance. A man who doesn't love you because he feels like it, but because he's committed to it. The fourth thing God wants you to look for is a man who carries emotional maturity, a man who can control his temper, a man who doesn't run when things get hard, a man who communicates instead of shutting down, a man who can tell you what's on his heart without fear or hiding. Because so many girls fall in love with what a man shows, his smile, his charm, his promises. But God wants you to pay attention to what he hides. His fears, his habits, his wounds, his character. Because the truth is, a man's emotional maturity will impact your peace far more than his looks will ever impress your eyes. The fifth thing God wants you to look for is a man who honors you. Not just likes you, not just compliments you, not just desires you, but honors you. A man who respects your boundaries, a man who protects your dignity, a man who speaks to you with kindness even in frustration, A man who chooses you without comparing you to anyone else. Honor is more than respect. It is the decision to treat you as God's daughter, not as an option, not as entertainment, and not as temporary comfort. When a man honors you, he values your future more than his moment. The sixth thing God wants you to look for is a man who believes in something bigger than himself. A man who prays. A man who seeks God. A man who admits that he needs guidance, strength, and wisdom beyond what the world can offer. A man who knows that his role is not just to lead you emotionally or financially, but spiritually. Because a man who follows God will know how to love you the way God intended. He will see your heart, not just your beauty. He will value your soul, not just your attention. He will choose purpose over temptation. And he will protect your relationship with prayer, boundaries, and intentionality. The seventh thing God wants you to look for is a man who is healed enough not to hurt you. No one is perfect and no one is flawless, but there is a difference between a man who is aware of his wounds and working on them and a man who bleeds all over you because he refuses to acknowledge them. A man who has never faced his trauma will make you responsible for fixing it. A man who has never dealt with his insecurities will make you pay for them. A man who has never confronted his past will drag you into it. God wants you with someone who is healing, not someone who needs you to become their healer. The eighth thing God wants you to look for is a man who makes you feel safe, a man whose intentions are clear, a man whose actions match his words, a man who gives you peace, not confusion, a man who protects your heart, not plays with it. Because when God sends a man into your life, he will not make you anxious, insecure, or afraid. He will not make you compete with other girls. He will not make you question your worth. He will give you space to breathe, grow, and feel at home, not in fear, but in trust. The ninth thing God wants you to look for is a man who sees the value in your dreams. A man who supports your calling. A man who doesn't shrink your ambition, but celebrates it. A man who wants to build a future with you, not control you. A man who sees your potential, not your limitations. God wants you with someone who doesn't just love you, but believes in the woman you are becoming. The 10th thing God wants you to look for is a man who chooses you in action, not just in emotion. A man who takes steps toward you. A man who doesn't play games. A man who is intentional. A man who makes room for you in his life, not someday, not when the time feels right, not after I figure things out, but now. Because the truth is, real men don't waste time. Real men don't confuse women. Real men don't hesitate when they know they've found someone rare. And finally, God wants you to look for a man who leads with love. A love that is patient. A love that is kind. A love that does not envy, does not boast, is not proud. A love that protects, trusts, hopes, and perseveres. A love that looks like Christ, not perfect, but pure-hearted. Not flawless, but faithful. Not always easy, but always intentional. So if you've been wondering what God wants you to look for, it's this: a man who loves him, a man who respects you, a man who grows, a man who chooses you, a man who brings you peace, a man who becomes a reflection of God's grace, not the source of your pain. And when God finally brings that man into your life, you won't have to chase him. You won't have to beg for clarity. You won't have to question his intentions. Because a God-sent man doesn't confuse your spirit, he confirms it.